My father left my brother Preston a $58 million pharmaceutical empire and our family's 12-bedroom mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The house where I grew up but never belonged, with its marble floors that echoed every footstep and windows so tall they made you feel small. My sister Bianca got his collection of 17 luxury cars, including the cherry red 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB that he spent more time polishing than he ever spent talking to me. Each car was worth more than I'd make in a decade studying marine life off the California coast. And me? Dalton Mercer, the family disappointment who chose to study fish instead of finance. The son who became a marine biologist instead of a businessman. I got a sealed white envelope that made everyone in that mahogany-paneled room burst into laughter. Preston actually doubled over, his Armani suit creasing as he wheezed between breaths. Bianca covered her mouth with her manicured hand, trying to look sympathetic while her eyes danced with amusement. Even Mr. Quentin Hale, our family lawyer who'd handled my father's affairs for 30 years, couldn't hide his pitying look as he handed me that pathetic envelope. But when I opened it that night in my studio apartment, sitting on my second-hand couch with a glass of cheap whiskey in my hand, there was just one word inside, written in my father's distinctive handwriting, truth. Below it, an address I had to read 3 times to believe was real. Zimmermann Private Bank, Bahnhofstrasse 12, Zurich, Switzerland. The next morning, I stood in front of that bank's marble entrance, jet-lagged and confused, clutching my envelope like a lottery ticket I wasn't sure I wanted to cash. The security guard took one look at my name on the visitor's log and immediately called someone. Within seconds, a distinguished older gentleman appeared, his gray eyes studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Mr. Dalton Mercer," he said in accented English, extending his hand. "I'm Roland Zimmermann. We've been waiting for you for 17 years. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my father, Vernon Mercer. The man who built an empire. The man who treated love like a business transaction. The man who kept me at arm's length my entire life, criticizing every choice I made, dismissing every achievement that didn't involve profit margins or stock prices. Turns out, Vernon Mercer wasn't even his real name. And that envelope everyone laughed at? It was the key to understanding why my cold, calculating father had spent 40 years playing a role that destroyed his relationship with his youngest son. He didn't leave me out of his will because he loved me least. He left me out because I was the only one he could trust with the truth about who he really was, what he'd really built, and why everything my brother just inherited was built on a foundation of lies. My name is Dalton Mercer, and this is the story of how a single word in an envelope brought down a pharmaceutical empire and finally showed me who my father really was. I sat in my beat-up 2008 Honda Civic outside the Mercer estate, watching the October rain streak down my windshield. The mansion loomed ahead like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone and ambition. 32 rooms that held 32 years of my life, and not a single moment where I felt like I belonged. The will reading was in 20 minutes, and I already knew how this would end. Preston would get everything that mattered. Bianca would get everything that sparkled. And I would get what I'd always gotten from Vernon Mercer. Disappointment wrapped in disapproval. The last time I'd been here was 6 months ago, 2 weeks before Vernon's heart attack. We'd argued, like always, in his study that smelled of leather-bound books he never read and Cuban cigars he wasn't supposed to smoke. "You're 32 years old, Dalton," he'd said, not looking up from his quarterly reports. Preston was running 3 departments by your age. Bianca had already married into the Ashford fortune. And you're studying fish migration patterns off the Santa Barbara coast. Marine ecosystems, Dad. I'm researching how climate change affects marine ecosystems. You're wasting your potential counting plankton while your brother builds an empire. He finally looked at me then, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. Your mother would be ashamed. That was Vernon's favorite weapon, invoking my mother, Judith, who died when I was 15. The truth was, she would have been proud. She was the one who bought me my first marine biology book, who took me to the Monterey Bay Aquarium every summer, who told me that the ocean had secrets worth discovering. But Vernon had rewritten her memory to suit his narrative, the way he rewrote everything. I forced myself out of the car and walked toward the house. The front door was still that imposing slab of imported mahogany, with the brass knocker shaped like a roaring lion. Preston opened it before I could knock, his smile sharp as a surgical scalpel. "Dalton? Surprised you could make it. How's the aquarium treating you?" He knew damn well I worked at a research facility, not an aquarium, but Preston had always been good at diminishing people with a smile. "It's a marine research center, Preston. We're doing important work on coral reef restoration." Right, saving the fish." He clapped me on the shoulder with fake brotherly affection, his Rolex catching the light. "Come on, everyone's waiting in Dad's study. Quentin says this won't take long." The house hadn't changed. Same marble floors that Mother used to dance across in her socks when Vernon was away on business. Same chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls during sunny afternoons. Same family portraits lining the hallway, a chronological lie about our perfect family. In every photo after Mom died, Vernon stood at the center, Preston to his right, Bianca to his left, and me slightly behind, slightly out of focus, like the photographer knew I didn't quite fit. Bianca was already in the study, perched on the leather sofa like a cat who'd found the sunniest spot in the house. Her husband was on speakerphone from Dubai, where he was closing some real estate deal that would make them even richer. "Dalton, darling," she air-kissed me, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "You look tired. Are you eating enough? I know how expensive food is when you're living on a researcher's salary." "I'm fine, Bianca. Of course you are." She smoothed her designer dress, a little black number that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Daddy always said you were too proud for your own good." Mr. Quentin Hale entered then, carrying a leather portfolio that looked as old as he was. He'd been Vernon's lawyer since before I was born, a man who knew all our family secrets and kept them locked behind professional discretion and billable hours. "Let's begin," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your father was very specific about how this should proceed." We arranged ourselves like actors in a play we'd rehearsed our whole lives. Preston in Vernon's chair behind the desk, already claiming his throne. Bianca on the sofa, diamonds glittering on her fingers like tears she'd never shed. And me by the window, looking out at the garden where Mom used to grow roses, now replaced by a Japanese rock garden that required no maintenance, no care, no love. "Vernon Mercer's last will and testament," Quentin began, his voice dry as old paper. "Executed 3 years ago and unchanged since that date." 3 years ago, right after I'd turned down Vernon's last offer to join Mercer Pharmaceuticals. The day I'd chosen my own path over his empire. The day he'd looked at me like I was already dead to him. Mr. Quentin Hale cleared his throat and began reading in that measured tone, lawyers perfect, after decades of delivering both fortunes and devastation. "I, Vernon Mercer, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Preston leaned forward in Vernon's chair, his hands steepled in front of him the same way our father used to sit during board meetings. "To my eldest son, Preston Mercer," Quentin continued, "I leave the entirety of Mercer Pharmaceuticals, including all holdings, patents, and subsidiary companies, valued at $58 million. Additionally, I leave him the Mercer family estate, including all buildings, grounds, and contents therein, with the exception of items specifically bequeathed to others." Preston didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He nodded slowly, as if accepting a crown he'd always known was coming. "I won't let you down, Dad," he said to Vernon's portrait on the wall, his voice thick with an emotion that might have been genuine if I hadn't known Preston better. "Furthermore," Quentin added, Preston shall inherit my position on the boards of Whitmore Industries, Castell Financial, and the Mercer Foundation, along with all associated voting rights and privileges." "Of course," Bianca murmured. "Daddy always said Preston was born to lead." Quentin turned the page, adjusting his glasses. "To my daughter, Bianca Mercer Ashford, I leave my complete automobile collection housed at the Mercer estate, including but not limited to the 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB, the 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, the 1961 Jaguar E-Type, and 14 other vehicles detailed in Appendix B. The total estimated value of this collection is $12 million. Bianca dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though I noticed her mascara remained perfectly intact. "He knew how much those cars meant to me," she said to her husband through the phone. "Remember our Sunday drives in the Ferrari, just Daddy and me?" I remembered those drives differently. I remembered standing in the garage, watching them leave, Vernon telling me I couldn't come because I'd get the leather seats dirty with my beach nonsense. And to my youngest son, Dalton Mercer, Quentin paused, reaching into his portfolio. He pulled out a small white envelope, the kind you'd use for a thank you card or a birthday invitation. "I leave this correspondence to be opened only in private. This constitutes the entirety of his inheritance." The study went completely silent, except for the rain and the sound of my own breathing. The envelope sat in Quentin's outstretched hand like an insult made tangible. Preston was the first to break. He started laughing, a harsh, barking sound that filled the room. "An envelope? That's it? Oh my God, Dalton, he left you a letter?" "Maybe it's a coupon," Bianca suggested, her voice pitched between sympathy and amusement. "You know how Daddy loved to teach lessons. Remember when he gave you that book about business management for your birthday? The year you asked for scuba equipment? This is even better," Preston wheezed, wiping his eyes. "At least the book had resale value. What's in the envelope, Quentin? An apology? A grocery list? His disappointment in writing?" "I'm not at liberty to say," Quentin replied, still holding out the envelope. Mr. Mercer was quite specific that it should only be opened in private. I took the envelope. It weighed nothing. Through the paper, I could feel something thin, maybe a single sheet. After 32 years as Vernon Mercer's son, after a lifetime of being compared to Preston and found wanting, after choosing my own path only to be punished for it, this was my inheritance. An envelope that my siblings found so hilarious they could barely contain themselves. "There must be something else," I heard myself say. "Mom's jewelry, her books, anything?" "Your mother's possessions were distributed according to her own will 17 years ago," Quentin said gently. "This envelope constitutes your father's entire bequest to you." "Daddy always said you'd get what you deserved," Preston said, finally getting control of his laughter. "I guess he meant it literally. You walked away from the family business to play with fish, and now you get to keep doing exactly that. No golden parachute for the prodigal son who never came home." Bianca at least tried to look sympathetic. "I'm sure there's something meaningful in there, Dalton. You know how Daddy was about his grand gestures." But she was already calculating. I could see it in her eyes. 12 million in cars for her, 58 million plus the estate for Preston, and an envelope for me. The family disappointment had been officially written out of the family fortune. I stood up, sliding the envelope into my jacket pocket. "If that's everything, I should go." "What, you're not staying for dinner?" Preston asked, already settling into his new role as lord of the manor. "We should celebrate, as a family." The word family in his mouth sounded like a door slamming shut. I walked out without answering, their laughter following me down the hallway, past the portraits, out the mahogany door, into the rain that felt warmer than that room. That night, I sat in my studio apartment in Santa Barbara, staring at the envelope on my coffee table. The place was exactly what you'd expect from someone living on a marine biologist's salary. second-hand furniture, walls lined with research journals, and a fish tank with a single betta named Darwin that my landlord didn't know about. The envelope looked out of place here, too clean and crisp for my worn-down world. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, the cheap stuff that burned just right, and picked up the envelope. Part of me wanted to burn it without opening it. Let Vernon's last words turn to ash like our relationship had years ago. But curiosity is the curse of every scientist, and I needed to know what final insult my father had crafted for me. The paper inside was thick, expensive stationery with Vernon's initials embossed at the top. His handwriting was as precise as ever, each letter formed with the same attention he gave to his business contracts. But there was only one word written in the center of the page. Truth below it, in smaller text, Zimmermann, Private Bank, Bahnhofstrasse, 12, Zurich, Switzerland. October 15th, 10:10 a.m. I read it 5 times, waiting for it to make sense. October 15th was exactly 1 week away. What kind of game was this? Vernon had never been one for mysteries or sentiment. Every action had a clear purpose, every decision a calculated outcome. I grabbed my laptop and searched for Zimmermann Private Bank. It existed, one of those discreet Swiss institutions that handled old money and darker secrets. No public website, just a phone number and an address that matched the one on the paper. I checked my watch. 9 p.m. in California meant 6 a.m. in Zurich. I'd have to wait. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night going through everything I knew about Vernon's business dealings. He'd built Mercer Pharmaceuticals from a small lab in San Diego into a multinational corporation. The official story was one of brilliant innovation and aggressive expansion. But there had always been whispers. Competitors who suddenly withdrew patent claims. Researchers who left the industry entirely. My mother arguing with him behind closed doors about blood money and stolen lives. At 11 p.m. California time, I called the bank. A woman answered in German, then switched to accented English when I responded. Zimmermann Private Bank, how may I direct your call? My name is Dalton Mercer. I received a letter instructing me to visit your bank on October 15th. There was a pause, the sound of typing. 1 moment, please, Mr. Mercer. The hold music was classical, something somber that seemed appropriate for a bank that dealt in secrets. Then a man's voice, deep and professionally grave. Mr. Dalton Mercer, this is Roland Zimmermann. We've been expecting your call. You've been expecting me? How is that possible? My father just died, and I only opened this letter an hour ago. Your father made arrangements many years ago, Mr. Mercer. Very specific arrangements. You must come in person, alone, and bring the envelope with you. Can you be here on October 15th? I don't understand. What is this about? Did my father have an account there? I cannot discuss this matter over the phone. What I can tell you is that this concerns more than money. Your father entrusted us with something that belongs to you and only you. October 15th, 10 a.m. sharp. Will you come? I looked around my apartment, at my stack of unpaid bills, at the grant rejection letters on my desk, at the life I'd built in defiance of Vernon's expectations. I'll be there. The next morning, I went to my supervisor at the Marine Research Center and requested emergency leave. Dr. Patel wasn't happy about it, especially with our coral restoration project at a critical phase. This is highly irregular, Dalton. We're in the middle of spawning season. Can't this wait? It's a family matter, my father's estate. She softened slightly. Everyone knew Vernon had just died, though nobody knew he'd essentially disinherited me. Take a week, but I need you back for the November readings. I emptied my savings account that afternoon, 2,136 euros and 82s. Enough for a round-trip ticket to Zurich if I flew economy and stayed in a hostel. My credit card had just enough room for the flight. Preston spent more than this on a single dinner, but it was everything I had. On the plane, pressed between a snoring businessman and a woman with a crying baby, I kept thinking about that word. Truth. Vernon had never been interested in truth, only in perception. He taught us to manage our image, control the narrative, never show weakness. So why now, after death, did he want me to find some truth in Switzerland? I remembered one night when I was 12, before Mom got sick. Vernon had come home from a business trip to Europe, and I'd heard him on the phone in his study speaking German. When he saw me listening, his face had turned to stone. "Never eavesdrop, Dalton," he'd said. "Some truths are too expensive for children to know." Now, 20 years later, I was flying to Zurich with his envelope in my pocket, chasing a truth he'd finally decided I could afford to know. The Zimmerman private bank looked like a fortress designed by someone who understood that true wealth whispered rather than shouted. Black marble facade, bulletproof glass, and a doorman who examined my passport with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Inside, everything was hushed elegance. Persian rugs that swallowed footsteps, paintings that belonged in museums, and the kind of silence that only serious money could buy. "Mr. Mercer," the receptionist said before I could speak, "Mr. Zimmerman is expecting you. Please follow me." She led me to a private elevator that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. We descended, the floors counting down like a countdown to something I couldn't name. Basement level 1. 2. 3. The doors opened to a hallway lined with steel vault doors. Roland Zimmerman stood waiting. A man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen enough secrets to fill libraries. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming. You have your mother's eyes." "You knew my mother?" "She came here once, shortly before her death. A remarkable woman. Please, this way." He led me to a vault door that looked like it could withstand a nuclear blast. The locking mechanism required his palm print, a 30-digit code, and a key that hung from a chain around his neck. Inside was a room I hadn't expected. Comfortable chairs, a mahogany table, and walls lined with filing cabinets. "Your father visited this room every year for the past 17 years, Zimmerman said, studying my face. "Always on the same date?" "October 15th. "That's today." "Yes, the anniversary of something that changed his life." "Please, sit." He pulled out a thick folder and placed it in front of me. Inside was a photograph of a young man I almost didn't recognize. Vernon, maybe 25 years old, standing in what looked like a laboratory, smiling. I'd never seen my father smile like that, genuine and unguarded. "Your father's real name was Otto Richter," Zimmerman began. "He was born in East Germany in 1952. A brilliant biochemist who developed a revolutionary antibiotic formula at age 26, something that could have saved millions of lives and cost pennies to produce." My hands went cold. That's impossible. Vernon Mercer built his company from nothing. He's American, from Ohio. Vernon Mercer from Ohio died in a car accident in 1979. Your father took his identity, his social security number, his whole life. It was the only way to escape what had been done to him. Zimmerman opened another folder, spreading out documents like tarot cards revealing a fortune I didn't want to know. Patent applications, laboratory reports, and then newspaper clippings in German, showing a laboratory fire, 3 scientists dead. "Your father's research partners were murdered," Zimmerman continued. "The laboratory was destroyed. The formula was stolen by an American pharmaceutical company that would eventually become part of what is now Mercer Pharmaceuticals. They made billions from his work while the world thought Otto Richter died in that fire. So, my father stole a dead man's identity to do what? Get revenge? To get evidence. He spent 40 years working his way up through the very company that stole his life's work. He documented everything. Every bribe, every stolen patent, every researcher they silenced. Your brother Preston has been taking money from competitors to keep certain drugs off the market. Your father has recordings, emails, proof of crimes that go back decades." I stared at the papers, my world tilting off its axis. Why didn't he just go to the authorities? Because the authorities were bought. Judges, FDA officials, senators. The corruption runs so deep that he needed someone on the inside to build an irrefutable case, and he needed his family to be protected. Zimmerman pulled out another document, a bank statement. This is the real inheritance, Mr. Mercer. $63 million. Money your father earned legitimately from his improvements to the stolen formulas, kept separate from the corrupt fortune. But it comes with a condition. Of course it does. You must use it to expose everything. Every crime, every cover-up, every death. Your father chose you because you walked away from the family business. You're the only one with clean hands. Preston is compromised. Bianca is innocent but weak. You chose science over money, integrity over comfort. You're the only one who can bring them down without being destroyed yourself. He handed me one final envelope. My mother's handwriting made my throat close up. My dear Dalton, I read aloud. If you're reading this, your father kept his promise. He was never the cold man he pretended to be. Every harsh word was to keep you away from the corruption. We pushed you toward the ocean because it was clean, honest work. Pure science. Now you have a choice. Take the money and disappear, or finish what Otto started. Use the truth. Love, Mom. I looked up at Zimmerman, then back at the evidence of my father's 40-year deception. He let me hate him. He let you stay clean, Zimmerman corrected. That was his gift, not the money, the freedom to choose the right thing. I thought of Preston in Vernon's chair, inheriting an empire built on blood. Show me everything. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse in San Diego, watching FBI agents escort Preston out in handcuffs. His Armani suit looked wrong with the silver. Bracelets, his confident smile finally wiped clean. The headline on every news site read the same. Pharmaceutical giant falls, founder's son exposes decades of corporate crimes. 17 executives indicted. $3 billion in settlements to families of silenced researchers. A complete restructuring of drug pricing that would save thousands of lives. Preston saw me as they led him past. You destroyed everything Dad built, he hissed. No, I said quietly. I destroyed everything Otto Richter had stolen from him. The story had broken slowly at first. I'd hired the best investigative journalists money could buy, fed them documents one revelation at a time. The stolen patents from East Germany, the researchers who died in suspicious accidents, the FDA officials on Mercer Pharmaceuticals' payroll, and Preston, recorded in his own voice, laughing about keeping cheap insulin alternatives off the market because diabetics will pay anything to stay alive. Bianca had called me crying when the first story broke. How could you do this to us? To Daddy's memory? Dad's memory was a lie, Bianca. Everything we had was built on other people's graves. She'd sold the cars within a week, before the FBI could seize them. Every penny went to medical research charities, her way of washing the blood off her inheritance. We don't talk anymore, but I heard she's volunteering at a free clinic in Guatemala, trying to balance the scales. The Mercer estate was seized as evidence, then sold at auction. Someone turned it into a rehabilitation center for people recovering from opioid addiction, which felt like the kind of justice my real father would have appreciated. I drove by it once and saw recovering addicts tending to a garden where Vernon's Japanese rocks used to be. They were growing roses, like Mom used to. I used $30 million of the Swiss money to establish the Judith Mercer Marine Conservation Center, built on the California coast where I'd done my research all those years. We study ocean acidification and coral restoration, the kind of pure science that never makes anyone rich but might help save the planet. The remaining money went to lawyers, investigators, and a trust fund for the families whose relatives had their work stolen by Mercer Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Patel, my old supervisor, now works for me as our head of research. You know, she said one day, watching our team tag sharks for migration studies, your father would be proud. Which one? I asked. Both of them. Vernon for the sacrifice, Otto for the justice. I keep 2 photos in my office now. One is of my mother, Judith, standing by the ocean with her arms spread wide like she could embrace the whole Pacific. The other is that young photo of Otto Richter in his laboratory, smiling at a future that was stolen from him. Sometimes I talk to them while I work late, analyzing data that won't make me rich but might make a difference. A journalist interviewed me last week for a documentary about the Mercer scandal. "Do you regret destroying your family's legacy?" she asked. "My family never had a legacy," I told her. "We had a lie that looked like success. My real legacy is this research center where we do honest work, where young scientists can pursue truth without worrying about who might profit from suppressing it." She asked one more question before leaving. "What do you think your father's last thoughts were, knowing his plan might work?" I thought about Otto Richter, the young scientist who lost everything and spent 40 years pretending to be someone else, who married my mother under a false name but loved her truly, who pushed me away to keep me clean, who let me hate him to keep me safe, who died as Vernon Mercer, the cold pharmaceutical executive, so that Otto Richter's truth could finally live. "I think he was finally free," I said. That night, alone in my small apartment by the beach, I opened the last box from Switzerland. Inside was a letter I'd been afraid to read, dated just a week before Vernon's heart attack. Dalton, my son, not by blood perhaps, but by choice, which is stronger. Every harsh word I spoke was a push toward the ocean, toward clean work, toward a life I couldn't have. Your mother and I agreed. One child must stay untainted. You were our hope for truth in a family built on lies. The envelope was never an insult. It was an invitation to be the man Vernon Mercer could never be, the man Otto Richter was murdered for being. Someone who puts truth before profit, knowledge before power, integrity before inheritance. You didn't get the least. You got the only thing that mattered. You got the truth. Use it well, with love I could never show your father. The truth. Such a small word to carry so much weight. But Vernon was right, or Otto was right. In the end, my father, whoever he really was, gave me the only inheritance that couldn't be corrupted, stolen, or lost. He gave me the freedom to choose truth over lies, justice over wealth, meaning over money. And that has made all the difference. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the smallest inheritance carries the greatest value. Leave a comment below about a time when the truth, no matter how difficult, set you free. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us that family isn't about blood or money, but about the choices we make and the truths we're brave enough to tell. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most valuable things in life often come in the smallest packages.